The remote research outpost on the distant planet had always been a place of quiet work and careful observation. Far away from the bustling colonies that dotted nearby star systems, the scientists who were stationed there had chosen this location because it was isolated. A perfect spot to study the strange and mysterious life forms that inhabited the planet without interference from outsiders. For months, everything had been going according to plan. The team conducted experiments, collected samples, and monitored the local environment, always keeping meticulous records of every anomaly they encountered. The planet itself was harsh and unforgiving. Its terrain was jagged, with enormous rock formations and deep chasms that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. The sky was a swirling mix of strange colors, often glowing with an eerie light that hinted at the planet's unusual atmospheric composition. Despite these challenges, the scientists adapted, using advanced equipment and survival techniques to live and work in this extreme environment. They had grown comfortable in the rhythm of their isolated life, confident that their training and experience could handle whatever the planet might throw at them. But things began to change subtly at first, almost imperceptibly. Small disturbances in the environment went unnoticed until they became impossible to ignore. Equipment started malfunctioning. Sensors picked up strange energy readings, and faint sounds echoed across the rocky landscape at odd hours. At first, the scientists tried to rationalize everything. Maybe it was just interference from the planet's magnetic fields, or a minor malfunction in their instruments. But deep down, a sense of unease began to take hold. Something was out there, and it was watching them. The tension grew quietly, building layer by layer, till it became a palpable fear that hung over the outpost like a dark cloud. Then came the first direct encounter. A small scouting party had been sent to collect samples from a distant crater. It's an area that had shown unusual biological activity on their scans. As they approached, the team noticed movements among the jagged rock shadows that shifted unnaturally, and creatures that seemed to appear and disappear without warning. The scientists were trained to be cautious, but nothing in their manuals or previous experience had prepared them for this. These were not ordinary life forms. They were intelligent, aggressive, and unlike anything humanity had encountered before. Communication back to the main outpost became frantic. The team reported their findings, but even as they did, the creatures began to surround them, forcing a rapid retreat. Panic started to set in, and for the first time, the scientists felt the raw, bone-deep fear of being completely outmatched on a planet that offered no refuge. Back at the outpost, the situation escalated rapidly. Alarms blared as the creatures approached, breaching perimeter defenses with terrifying speed and intelligence. The researchers tried to activate automated defense systems, but many of the systems failed under the creature's strange energy interference. It became clear that this was no ordinary threat. They were dealing with an alien species that had evolved in a way that allowed it to adapt and counter human technology almost immediately. The scientists realized that if they did not act quickly, their entire team could be wiped out. In desperation, they began sending out an emergency signal using every possible frequency to call for help. Their message was simple but urgent, a life or death SOS, warning any nearby allies of the unprecedented danger they faced. Time stretched unbearably as the signal traveled across the vast distances of space. The scientists worked tirelessly, trying to hold the outpost together while keeping the creatures at bay. Makeshift barricades were erected and improvised weapons were prepared. But it was clear that nothing they had could fully stop the alien threat. Every passing minute brought more uncertainty and fear. The once quiet planet had become a battlefield, and the scientists were acutely aware that they were on their own, relying only on the hope that someone, somewhere, would receive their plea and respond. And then they did. The SOS was picked up by the Deathworlders, a group with a reputation that sent shivers through anyone who heard their name. The Deathworlders were known not for diplomacy, but for their brutal efficiency and unflinching approach to danger. To the scientists, they were a last hope, the only chance to survive an encounter with a species that seemed unstoppable. But contacting them also brought mixed emotions. The Deathworlders' reputation for showing no mercy meant that the scientists were unsure what to expect. Would they come to help, Or would their presence make the situation even more dangerous? Still, there was no other option. The SOS was sent, carrying all the fear, urgency, and hope that the scientists could muster. As the outpost waited in tense silence for a response, the creatures continued to close in. Shadows shifted across the walls of the outpost. Strange sounds filled the air, a constant reminder that every second could be their last. The scientists huddled together, communicating in hushed voices, sharing what little information they had gathered about the creature's behavior and weaknesses. Fear and determination coexisted in a fragile balance, each moment filled with the knowledge that survival depended not just on their own actions, but on the arrival of the Deathworlders. The planet, which had once seemed like a place of scientific wonder, had transformed into a stage for a life or death, a struggle that no one could have anticipated. By the time the SOS had fully transmitted, the outpost was on the brink of collapse. Systems were failing, supplies were dwindling, and morale was dangerously low. Yet even in the face of overwhelming danger, the scientists remained vigilant. They recorded every detail, every encounter, every strange phenomenon, understanding that this information could one day save others, or at least explain what had happened if they did not survive. The tension was suffocating, and the hours dragged on like days. Every shadow, every movement outside the walls of the outpost was a potential threat, and every heartbeat was a reminder of how precarious their situation had become. And then, finally, a faint signal appeared on the communication channels, a confirmation that the Deathworlders had received the SOS. Relief mixed with apprehension as the scientists realized that help was on the way, but not in the gentle, careful manner they might have hoped for. The Deathworlders were coming, and their arrival promised salvation, yes, but also an intensity and ferocity that few could truly comprehend. In that moment, the scientists understood that their lives were about to be forever changed. They had called for help, and help had come, but it would come with the unmistakable presence of unstoppable force, a reckoning that would decide the fate of everyone on that planet. The outpost was battered, tense and teetering on the edge of destruction. While in the distance, the Deathworlders prepared their approach. The scientists had survived the initial encounters, but they knew that the true test was just beginning. The alien species had made its presence known, but the arrival of the Deathworlders promised a confrontation unlike anything the planet had ever witnessed. Fear, hope, and anticipation coexisted in a fragile balance. Leaving the outpost and its inhabitants suspended in a moment of suspense, waiting for the next chapter of this life-or-death struggle to unfold? Asterisk. The moment the SOS signal reached the Deathworlders, their response was swift and uncompromising. Unlike any ordinary rescue team, they did not pause to weigh options or debate strategies. Their ships cut through the void of space like shadows, silent and deadly, yet unmistakably powerful. These were beings who thrived on danger, who had built their reputation on facing threats that others would flee from. Their reputation alone carried weight across the galaxy, and as their ships drew closer to the troubled planet, a ripple of fear and anticipation spread among the local colonies that had heard whispers of their legendary ferocity. The scientists at the outpost were the first to notice the approaching vessels. At first, they could only see the faint blips on their sensors, small points of light moving with uncanny precision through the planet's atmosphere. Then, as the ships descended, the enormity of their presence became clear. They were massive, armored, and bristling with technology that no one had seen before. Every detail of their design spoke of efficiency and lethality. Angular surfaces to deflect attacks, reinforced hulls that could withstand extreme conditions, and weaponry that seemed almost alive, scanning constantly for threats. The scientists, despite their fear and fatigue, could not help but feel a sense of awe. These were not ordinary rescuers. They were the Deathworlders, and their arrival promised a force unlike anything they had ever imagined. Landing was precise and methodical. The Deathworlders did not rush. They did not hesitate. They moved with a calculated grace, deploying advanced sensors and reconnaissance drones to scan the terrain. Every movement was deliberate, every action purposeful, from the very first step. It was clear that they were assessing the situation with a level of efficiency that was almost terrifying. The scientists watched as the Deathworlders surveyed the wreckage of the outpost and the surrounding terrain. The team could see that these rescuers were not just coming to save lives, they were preparing to strike at the threat itself. To eradicate the alien species that had brought the outpost to the brink of destruction.
The presence of the Deathworlders also brought an immediate psychological shift among the scientists. The fear that had gripped them for days, the sense of being completely alone and outmatched, began to shift into cautious hope. Yet, this hope was tempered by the knowledge of the Deathworlders' reputation. These were not beings known for mercy. Their help came with a promise of absolute power and total dominance over any threat. The scientists understood that the coming encounter would not be gentle. Their survival depended on the Deathworlders' ability to destroy the alien species completely, and they were prepared to do exactly that, without hesitation or pity. The first reconnaissance drones sent out by the Deathworlders moved like predators across the rugged landscape. They scanned every nook and cranny, analyzing the alien species' patterns, behavior, and potential weaknesses. The creatures that had terrorized the outpost were intelligent, adaptive, and aggressive, but the Deathworlders treated them as problems to be solved, as challenges to be conquered. The scientists watched in a mixture of fascination and fear as the drones relayed precise data back to the main group, showing every movement and every anomaly in the terrain. For the first time, the researchers realized that the Deathworlders did not rely on guesswork or panic. They relied on understanding, planning, and execution. Communication between the scientists and the Deathworlders was minimal, almost clinical. The Deathworlders did not offer comfort or reassurance. They were not there to talk or explain. They were there to act. Still, the presence of such decisive force brought a sense of relief. The scientists knew that they could no longer hope to fend off the alien species on their own. They had called for help, and now help had arrived in the form of unstoppable power. Watching the Deathworlders prepare their assault, the team began to regain a fragile sense of control, knowing that the nightmare they had faced alone was about to meet its match. The planet itself seemed to respond to the arrival of the Death. The jagged rocks and deep chasms, which had once felt threatening and confining, now became a backdrop for an impending reckoning. The sensors picked up movement from the alien species as they sensed the approach of the new force. It was as if the planet itself held its breath, waiting to witness the clash between the invaders and the legendary warriors who had answered the call. The scientists could only watch, powerless, as the Deathworlders mapped out the battlefield with meticulous precision, understanding terrain, sightlines, and potential ambush points. Every detail mattered, and nothing was left to chance. As preparations continued, the scientists observed the physical prowess and discipline of the Deathworlders. They moved with synchronized precision, their armor and equipment functioning seamlessly together. Weapons were tested and calibrated, energy shields activated, and combat strategies rehearsed with rapid efficiency. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. It was clear that these were beings who had faced countless threats and survived, not through luck, but through skill, planning, and the ruthless application of power. Every action spoke of experience, of battles fought and won against odds that would have destroyed any ordinary being. The alien species, sensing the arrival of such a force, began to react. They moved strategically, attempting to hide and regroup, but the Deathworlders anticipated every move. Using a combination of drones, sensors, and careful observation, they tracked the aliens' patterns and weaknesses. The scientists were amazed to see how quickly the Deathworlders adapted to new information, adjusting tactics in real time, predicting the creature's responses before they could act. It was an almost terrifying display of intellect and efficiency, a reminder that these were not ordinary soldiers or mercenaries. They were elite beings whose purpose was survival and victory at all costs. As the Deathworlders finalized their approach, the tension among the scientists grew again, but this time it was mixed with a sense of anticipation. They could see that the aliens were no longer the dominant force on the planet. The balance of power had shifted. The Deathworlders were poised to strike, and their presence alone was reshaping the battlefield. The scientists felt both awe and fear, knowing that the coming confrontation would be unlike anything they had ever witnessed. The outpost, damaged and battered as it was, had become a silent witness to a force that promised both salvation and overwhelming power. By the end of this phase, the stage was fully set. The Deathworlders had arrived, assessing the situation with unmatched precision and preparing to confront the alien species directly. The scientists, though still in danger, had regained hope, understanding that the tide was turning. The planet, once hostile and unpredictable, was now the site of an impending clash between two forces, the alien invaders and the unstoppable Deathworlders. In this moment, the scientists realized that survival was no longer just about hiding or defending. It was about witnessing the reckoning that was about to unfold, and hoping that the Deathworlders' legendary ruthlessness would be enough to save them. The moment the Deathworlders decided to act, the atmosphere around the outpost changed completely. What had been tense anticipation became a storm of controlled, terrifying force. Unlike anything the scientists had ever seen, the Deathworlders moved with a deadly grace. their presence alone sending a message to the alien species that dominance was no longer optional, it was inevitable. The creatures, once bold and aggressive, hesitated as the first signs of the Deathworlders' counterattack began. Shadows moved across the jagged terrain, and the ground seemed to vibrate slightly under the weight and energy of the approaching force. The scientists, hiding behind barricades and battered walls, watched with a mix of awe, fear, and hope. They knew that the next hours would decide their survival. The Deathworlders launched the assault with precision. They didn't rush in blindly. Every movement was calculated, every strike purposeful. Using advanced reconnaissance data collected from drones and sensors, they identified the alien species' positions, their defensive formations, and their likely escape routes. The first wave of attacks came swiftly, targeting key points where the creatures had gathered. Energy blasts lit up the rocky landscape, searing the ground and illuminating the chaos in harsh, white light. The aliens, intelligent and adaptive, tried to respond with counterattacks, but the Deathworlders were always one step ahead. Every movement of the aliens was anticipated. Every strategy counted before it could fully unfold. The scientists could hardly comprehend what they were witnessing. The Deathworlders were methodical, almost surgical in their approach. They struck in rapid, coordinated waves, surrounding and isolating the alien forces. Each Deathworlder moved with expert precision, using a combination of strength, speed, and tactical intelligence. Their weapons were unlike anything the scientists had ever seen. Energy-based, adaptive, and deadly accurate. Explosions erupted across the terrain, but each strike seemed to hit only where it was intended, minimizing unnecessary destruction and ensuring the complete neutralization of the threat. It was chaos controlled by an unseen hand. Destruction wielded with the discipline of warriors who had faced countless dangers before. Despite the overwhelming power of the Deathworlders, the alien species fought back fiercely. They were resilient, adaptive, and cunning, using every tactic they could to gain an advantage. Some tried to flee into the jagged landscape, others attempted to regroup and counterattack in coordinated strikes, but the Deathworlders anticipated every movement. Using their drones and advanced sensors, they tracked even the smallest shifts in the alien positions. Every attempt at resistance was met with swift and precise force. The creatures that had terrorized the outpost for days now found themselves overwhelmed, outmatched, and outmaneuvered at every turn. The scientists watched the battle unfold in a mixture of horror and fascination. They had expected help, yes, but they had not expected such total uncompromising efficiency. The Deathworlders did not simply fight, they dominated. Every step they took, every weapon discharged, was part of a larger strategy to eradicate the threat completely. For the first time, the scientists felt a glimmer of real hope. The alien species that had seemed unstoppable was being dismantled piece by piece. Their defenses broken, their formations shattered, and their numbers dwindling rapidly. The terrain itself played a role in the battle, and the Deathworlders used it expertly. They moved with an awareness of the jagged rocks, deep chasms, and unpredictable surfaces, turning the landscape into an advantage rather than a challenge. The aliens, unfamiliar with such terrain mastery, found themselves funneled into traps and ambushes. Energy blasts and strategic strikes cut off their escape routes, while the Deathworlders' relentless pressure prevented any regrouping. It was a display of tactical genius, and the scientists could hardly believe their eyes. The creatures that had seemed invincible were being systematically destroyed, not by luck, but by the skill and experience of the Death.
Amidst the chaos, the scientists tried to remain focused on survival. They stayed low, avoiding direct lines of fire while taking notes and recording data. Every move of the Deathworlders was documented, every alien behavior observed, and every strategy analyzed. Even in the midst of life-or-death action, the researchers maintained their scientific curiosity. They were witnessing a force that defied ordinary comprehension, a group of beings whose very existence seemed to bend the rules of conventional warfare. The knowledge that they were seeing something unique, something almost mythical, was tempered by the reality that their own survival depended on remaining unseen and unharmed. The alien species, realizing that they were outmatched, began to retreat in desperation. Some tried to hide among the jagged rocks, some attempted to flee across the open terrain, and a few even tried to negotiate through strange signals. Though it was clear they understood the futility of their efforts, the Deathworlders, however, were relentless. They pursued each target with unwavering focus, leaving no opportunity for regrouping or escape. The creatures that had once terrorized the scientists were being dismantled methodically, their adaptability no match for the Deathworlders' combination of skill, technology, and ruthless determination. Every strike, every movement, and every decision made by the Deathworlders demonstrated their experience in dealing with dangerous, unpredictable threats. They operated with a single-minded purpose, to neutralize the alien species completely and ensure the survival of any innocents in the area. The scientists were awed by their efficiency, but also reminded of the harsh reality that the Deathworlders were not here to comfort, to explain, or to negotiate. They were here to conquer and eliminate the threat, no matter what it took. The level of precision and control on display was unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. A reminder that the galaxy was full of forces far beyond ordinary comprehension as the battle reached its climax. The alien species was on the brink of total annihilation. Resistance had slowed, movement had become disorganized, and their once coordinated attacks had devolved into chaotic, desperate measures. The Deathworlders did not waver. They closed in, striking with coordinated precision, ensuring that every last threat was accounted for. The scientists watched as the creatures that had terrified them for days were finally overcome. Their presence eliminated from the terrain. The scale of destruction was immense, but it was controlled, calculated, and complete. The Deathworlders had done exactly what they had come to do. They had answered the call and removed the threat entirely. In the aftermath of the battle, the scientists were left in stunned silence. The terrain was scarred, the outpost battered, and the alien species eradicated. But the Deathworlders stood resolute, surveying the scene with calm efficiency. The scientists felt a mix of relief and reverence. They had survived, thanks to beings who operated beyond ordinary human understanding. Their lives had been spared, and yet they had witnessed a level of power and ruthlessness that few could imagine. The alien threat, once a terrifying unknown, had been neutralized completely. The Deathworlders had demonstrated why their reputation was feared and respected across the galaxy. They had struck decisively, eliminated the threat, and ensured the survival of the outpost's scientists. The planet, once a place of danger and uncertainty, was now under the control of these legendary warriors. The scientists, exhausted and awed, realized that their lives had been forever changed. They had witnessed the full force of beings who showed no mercy to any adversary, yet had saved those who were innocent. The balance had shifted, and survival had been secured not by luck, but by the unparalleled skill, planning, and ruthless efficiency of the Deathworlders. Asterisk, once the alien threat had been completely neutralized. A strange quiet settled over the planet. The chaos of battle, the explosions, the shouts, and the frantic movements of both humans and creatures had ended, leaving behind only the scorched terrain, broken structures, and an eerie stillness that stretched across the jagged landscape. The scientists, exhausted and shaken, stepped carefully from their hiding places. Their eyes scanned the scene with a mixture of disbelief and relief. What had seemed impossible only hours ago, surviving against a species that had outmatched every human. Strategy had been accomplished. They had witnessed a power so immense, so precise, that it was almost beyond comprehension. The Deathworlders, standing amidst the destruction, were like statues carved from steel and discipline, unyielding and resolute. The first priority for the Deathworlders was to secure the planet. Though the immediate threat had been eliminated, there was always the possibility of hidden dangers aliens that had managed to hide. Environmental hazards, or remnants of the previous battle that could still pose a risk. They moved with careful attention, scanning every rock formation, every cave, every shadowed corner. Drones floated silently above the terrain, their sensors sweeping constantly for anomalies. The Deathworlders' movements were methodical. They were not there to celebrate victory. They were there to ensure that victory was complete. Every step they took reinforced their reputation, precise, efficient, and utterly unforgiving toward anything that might endanger life or survival. The scientists, though grateful for their survival, were in awe of the Deathworlders' discipline. They had seen beings capable of unparalleled violence, but what amazed them most was the intelligence behind the force. Each Deathworlder seemed to operate as both individual and part of a larger organism, seamlessly coordinating attacks, reconnaissance, and strategy. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation, and no room for error. Even in the aftermath, as they surveyed the planet for remaining threats, the Deathworlders moved with absolute purpose. Their presence was both a comfort and a reminder that survival in this universe depended on the ability to control and dominate one's environment completely. Amidst this careful operation, the Deathworlders also turned their attention to the research outpost itself. Though the building had been heavily damaged in the initial alien attacks and the subsequent battle, there was still valuable technology, scientific data, and resources that could be salvaged. The scientists watched as the Deathworlders systematically cleared the debris, repaired essential systems, and retrieved critical data. Nothing was left to chance. Equipment was carefully examined, samples were cataloged, and technology that could be reused or studied was preserved. The Deathworlders treated the outpost not as a simple base, but as a repository of knowledge and a place worth protecting. Their actions demonstrated a respect for human ingenuity, even as they themselves operated on a level that was far beyond anything the scientists could achieve. The scientists themselves began to emerge from their hiding places, slowly regaining their composure. They were cautious, unsure of how to interact with these legendary beings. The Deathworlders did not seek acknowledgement or gratitude, but their presence alone was enough to convey a message. The scientists were alive because these warriors had chosen to act decisively. There was no room for misunderstandings, no speeches or comforting words. Everything was communicated through action. The scientists absorbed this lesson quickly. Survival was not about pleading for mercy or negotiating safety. It was about being in the right place at the right time and relying on those who possessed the skill and resolve to enforce it. As the aftermath unfolded, the scale of what had happened became clearer. The alien species that had seemed unstoppable was gone, and the planet itself bore the marks of the intense conflict. Jagged rocks were scorched, craters had formed where energy blasts had struck, and strange alien technology lay scattered and dismantled. The Deathworlders moved through this landscape with careful attention, documenting, analyzing, and ensuring that nothing dangerous remained. They treated every detail with importance. Every movement, every observation was a step toward ensuring that no trace of the alien threat could rise again to endanger lives. The scientists, while documenting their own observations, realized that this was more than just a cleanup operation. It was a complete reclamation of the planet by an unstoppable force. During this phase, the scientists also had the opportunity to recover emotionally. Fear and tension had dominated their lives for so long that the sudden cessation of hostilities created a strange vacuum. They could finally breathe, take stock of what they had endured, and begin to process the enormity of the events. There were tears, whispered conversations, and silent moments of awe as they reflected on their survival. And yet there was also a sober understanding that the Deathworlders were not here to coddle anyone. They had acted with ruthless efficiency to remove the threat, and their actions were a reminder that in the universe, survival often depended on those who could impose order through strength, skill, and decisive action. In addition to securing the outpost and the surrounding area, the Deathworlders made sure that any remaining alien technology or hazards were neutralized. Devices that could have posed a future threat were dismantled. Samples were contained, and the planet's surface was scanned repeatedly to ensure that no hidden dangers remained. Every action reinforced the lesson that the Deathworlders did not leave anything to chance. They were thorough in ways that humans rarely experienced, leaving no room for error, no possibility of miscalculation, and no threat unaddressed. Their presence was both protective and intimidating, a constant reminder that safety had been achieved through skill and power, not through luck or negotiation. As the scientists observed all of this, they began to understand the larger implications of what had occurred. The Deathworlders were not simply warriors, they were enforcers of survival. Beings who operated with a code that prioritized decisive action and absolute efficiency. Their presence on the planet had changed the dynamics of power entirely. Any future threats, any hostile forces that might attempt to approach the outpost, would have to contend with the knowledge that the Deathworlders had arrived, acted, and ensured dominance. The galaxy itself seemed to shift in awareness when the Deathworlders intervened. Their actions were a statement, a lesson in both the brutality and the necessity of power. The planet had been reclaimed, the alien threat eliminated, and the research outpost secured. The scientists, though exhausted and still in shock, had survived because of the Deathworlders' intervention. They had witnessed the full extent of these legendary beings' power, their precision, their ruthlessness, and their unwavering dedication to ensuring survival. The landscape bore the scars of battle, but it also stood as a testament to the skill and efficiency of the Deathworlders. In the silence that followed, the scientists could finally reflect on the magnitude of what had happened. They had faced near certain death, called upon beings of unparalleled capability, and survived to witness the consequences of unstoppable power applied with perfect precision. The scientists began to prepare for what came next: rebuilding, learning from the events, and understanding the full implications of having encountered the Deathworlders. The planet itself had become a place of both memory and caution, a place where survival had been ensured by beings who showed no mercy to adversaries but preserved life for those deemed worthy. The lessons learned during this time would stay with the scientists forever. Survival depended on courage, understanding, and sometimes on forces far beyond human comprehension. The Deathworlders had intervened, acted decisively, and left a lasting impact on the planet, the outpost, and the people who had witnessed their arrival and their methods. Once the immediate danger was over, and the Deathworlders had left the planet's surface secured, the full impact of what had happened began to settle in on the scientists and the surrounding galactic colonies. The alien species that had threatened the outpost was no longer a danger, and the research team had survived against impossible odds. But the presence of the Deathworlders left an undeniable mark, not just physically on the planet, but psychologically, socially, and even politically across the nearby systems. The story of their intervention quickly spread, carried by messages, signals, and reports from the surviving scientists, painting a vivid picture of a force that answered calls for help with absolute decisiveness and terrifying efficiency. Back at the outpost, the scientists worked tirelessly to repair what they could and recover the data that had survived the battle. Equipment was carefully examined, samples were cataloged, and the notes and recordings of their research were preserved as best as possible. They were aware that their survival was miraculous. Every action they took was tinged with gratitude for the Deathworlders' intervention. Yet at the same time, there was a lingering sense of caution. The Deathworlders had acted with complete focus on eliminating the threat, and the scientists understood that their role in the battle had been minor compared to the unstoppable force they had witnessed. The memory of that overwhelming presence would stay with them forever. A reminder that help in the galaxy often came from beings whose ways were beyond ordinary understanding. The Deathworlders themselves left the planet without ceremony. They did not linger to offer thanks, instructions, or guidance. Their presence was not about recognition or admiration. It was about action and the completion of their mission. As their ships disappeared into the starry expanse, a profound silence fell over the planet. The jagged rocks and craters, the scorched remnants of the alien threat, and the battered outpost all bore witness to the decisive force that had passed through. For the scientists, this departure was both a relief and a source of anxiety. While the immediate danger was gone, they were acutely aware that the Deathworlders' involvement was finite. Once gone, no such power would be there to intervene again. The responsibility to rebuild, recover, and protect the outpost now rested entirely on human shoulders. Across the nearby colonies and star systems, news of the Deathworlders' actions spread rapidly. Reports described the alien threat in terrifying detail, but emphasized how the Deathworlders had neutralized it without hesitation or compromise. Their name, already known in whispers and legends, became synonymous with both salvation and fear. Civilizations learned a vital lesson. If you called on the Deathworlders, help would come, but it would come with no mercy for any threat. Their reputations solidified across the galaxy, not as negotiators or diplomats, but as unstoppable enforcers of survival. Any species or entity that opposed them learned quickly that resistance was futile, and any civilization in need could count on intervention, but at the cost of witnessing sheer, uncompromising force. For the scientists, this realization was personal and immediate. They had lived through a nightmare and emerged alive because the Deathworlders acted decisively. Yet, they also understood the gravity of what it meant to rely on such power. The Deathworlders did not operate by human standards of morality, compassion, or compromise. They acted according to rules that were alien and absolute. Threats must be eliminated, survival ensured, and no adversary left unchecked. While the scientists were grateful, they also recognized that their survival depended on being in the right place at the right time and calling upon forces capable of extraordinary and sometimes terrifying action. The planet itself became a symbol of the Deathworlders' power. Craters, scorched earth, and dismantled alien technology were reminders that in the galaxy, safety was often purchased at the cost of overwhelming force. The scientists carefully documented the battlefield, recording what had happened, how the Deathworlders had moved, and the methods they had used. These records became crucial not just for understanding the alien species, but for understanding the extraordinary beings who had saved their lives. For years to come, the outpost would serve as a testament to the intervention of the Deathworlders, a place where impossible threats were overcome, where survival was secured by intelligence, strategy, and ruthlessness applied without hesitation, even after the immediate aftermath. The influence of the Deathworlders was evident. Nearby civilizations, hearing of their actions, began to take the presence of the Deathworlders into account in their own strategies and politics. Military planners, diplomats, and leaders understood that the Deathworlders were a force that could not be ignored. Any aggressive moves, hostile plans, or invasions had to consider the possibility that these legendary warriors could intervene decisively. The Deathworlders had changed the balance of power in this corner of the galaxy, simply by acting with total efficiency against the alien threat. Their presence was a warning. Power exists not only in numbers or technology, but in the skill and resolve to apply it without hesitation. For the scientists personally, experience left a lasting impression. Many had faced fear before, but nothing compared to witnessing the Deathworlders in action. They had seen a force that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, capable of reducing what seemed unstoppable to nothing more than a memory. Their understanding of survival, danger, and the galaxy itself had changed forever. They became more cautious, more aware of the forces around them, and more respectful of the extraordinary beings that roamed the stars. Their research, while still important, was now accompanied by a profound awareness of their own vulnerability and the unpredictable nature of the universe. Over time, the story of the intervention became a cautionary tale. Civilizations spoke of the alien threat, of the outpost under siege, and of the Deathworlders' decisive actions. Lessons were drawn about survival, strategy, and the power of decisive force. Those who had called for help learned that salvation could be brutal, swift, and uncompromising, but it could also save lives when no other option existed. The story emphasized the importance of understanding that in the galaxy, not all help comes gently. Some help comes with force, precision, and an unwavering commitment to survival.
The scientists had begun rebuilding their lives and their work. The planet, once a site of terror and near destruction, was now a place of cautious hope. They had survived, they had preserved their research, and they had gained an understanding of forces far beyond human capability. The Deathworlders, though gone, had left a lasting impression, a reminder that in the vastness of space, survival often depended on intervention from those who could act decisively and without mercy. The galaxy had witnessed their power, and the scientists had lived to tell the tale, forever changed by the experience. In the end, the episode served as both a warning and a lesson. The Deathworlders had answered the SOS, acted with overwhelming efficiency, and ensured survival against impossible odds. They showed that help could come, but that it was not gentle or compromising. It was absolute, decisive, and final. The scientists, the planet, and nearby civilizations had all been touched by their presence, learning that in the universe, the true measure of power is not just survival, but the ability to impose it completely. The story of the Deathworlders' intervention would be remembered for generations, a tale of danger, survival, and the unstoppable force that answers the call when the universe demands it.